Hey guys, so today I'm going to show how I make my easy no fuss daily sourdough bread. The printable recipe will be linked in the description box down below. So I'm using my big mixer today, my Famag IM10 mixer. Because it does sometimes heat up the dough, I am going to use some ice. If you have a mixer that tends to get warm, especially with sourdough, I think it's important to control the temperature. I'm not going to be taking the temperature of the dough because I'm fairly confident now and don't need to do that, but I am going to start with ice. So just going to put some in here. Okay. And now I'm going to put my water. Again, all of the measurements will be in the recipe in the description box. With sourdough, it's really important for it not to get too hot because it does run the risk of overproofing. So that's why I like to use ice, because I want to be able to knead the dough long enough to get a really nice window pane without having to have the fear of it overheating. Especially since fresh milled flour is warm to begin with, it's really important to keep the temperature down. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in my starter that is made with fresh milled hard white wheat. I'm making 2 loaves today, so if it looks like a lot, that's why. So I'm going to initially start the mix with the water, the sourdough starter, and the fresh milled flour. Okay, I'm gonna just give that a quick little stir just to make sure that the starter is nicely distributed. Okay, now I'm going to add in my fresh milled flour and my vital wheat gluten. I like to mix the vital wheat gluten into the flour before I put it into the recipe. That way I don't have clumps. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and transfer this to the mixer and start the initial mixing. I'm going to go ahead and give this a mix. I'm not trying to knead the dough yet. I'm just going to mix it so that I can leave it to rest, so the flour can have a moment to absorb the liquids. So I'm going to let that mix until all of the flour is fully incorporated. Okay, now that you can see that the flour is fully incorporated, I'm going to go ahead and stop the mixer. Let's take a look. All right. So all of the flour is fully incorporated. So now I'm going to go ahead and cover this with a damp cloth and allow it to rest for about 20 to 30 minutes. Hey guys, so it's been about 30 minutes now. So I'm going to add in my salt and go ahead and knead the dough. Once the gluten is pretty nicely developed, sometimes I do like to add in a little bit more water just to get a bit more of an open crumb. This is not at all necessary. You could leave it as is, but because I'm using a spiral mixer, it does a really great job of adding in extra water. This is called basinage. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's basically when you add in additional water after the gluten is already well developed. And you can see it accepts the water very easily. It doesn't make the dough fall apart. When doing this, it's best to do it once the gluten is already well developed. It makes it a lot easier for it to accept the water. Okay, so this is after I've added all of my additional water. Again, this is not necessary. This is just something that I do just to push the hydration a bit further, to have a bit more of an open crumb on my loaf. And now I'm going to go ahead and get this out. and into a lightly oiled container. And actually, before I get this into a container, I'm going to get my dough temperature in case anyone is wondering. So I'll go ahead and get that. And looks like it's 77.2 degrees Fahrenheit, in case anyone is wondering, which is a really good temperature for sourdough. Again, we don't want it too hot. Anything over 85 degrees is going to be too hot for sourdough. So 77 is really good for sourdough. So I could leave it as is and just allow it to bulk ferment. Um, but I do want to continue to build strength in the dough throughout the bulk fermentation. And so I will do 2 coil folds. And this is just to improve the overall rise and texture of the dough, but it's not required. Most things are not required. People have been making bread for thousands of years without doing half of the things that we do today. But um, I'm going to do it because I do like the light, airy crumb that I get from it. So I'll go ahead and do a window pane test. And there it is. And I'll put the hydration level on the screen. I did increase the hydration. The original recipe has a hydration percentage of, I believe, 86%. I did increase the hydration, and I will put it on the screen what I increased it to. I ended up adding 107 more grams of water, and so I will calculate that once I'm done recording and put that on the screen for you guys. So as you can see here, the gluten is not organized, so when I come back and do the coil folds, the gluten strands will be nicely organized and will begin to build more strength in our dough for a nice oven spring. All right, I'll be back shortly. This is now 15 minutes later, and you can see the dough has completely flattened out. I have a bowl of water on the side here to keep my hands wet so that the dough does not stick to my hands. Also, once the dough flattens out, I like to mark it on the side. That way I can tell how much the dough has grown as it's bulk fermenting. So I'm just getting my hands under the dough, and then I lift it up and fold it over on itself. This is a lot more gentle than a stretch and fold. So I like to do these after the gluten is already well developed, just to build extra strength in the dough. Hey guys, so it's been 30 minutes, so I'm back for my second and final coil fold. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did the first time. And as you can see, the dough is a lot stronger. It's no longer completely flat. It still has the rounded sides. So that lets me know that the strength is building in the dough. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stretch it up and then fold it over on itself. I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing. And the dough is a lot more cohesive. The gluten is a lot stronger. If I were to manipulate this too much, the dough would easily tear because the gluten strands are so tight. Okay, so that was my final coil fold. And so I'm going to allow this to finish bulk fermentation. I'm going to allow it to rise until it is almost doubled in size. Okay, so now bulk fermentation is done. I am just drizzling a bit of water on my counter so that the dough does not stick to it. So I allow mine to bulk ferment until it has risen about 70%, so not quite doubled in size. And I like to weigh my dough so that I can divide it evenly. I like having nice, even loaves so that way they bake uniformly. So I'm going ahead and dumping my dough on my wet countertop here. It's just wet with a little bit of water. And I also wet my bench scraper as well so that it does not stick. I'm going to go ahead and divide my dough into two since I am making 2 loaves, and I'm going to use my scale to make sure that I have 2 even loaves. The water is very helpful to keep the dough from sticking, but if you find that your dough is just very sticky and it's spreading out a lot, that is a good indication that you may have overproofed your dough. And if that is the case, I just encourage you to go ahead and bake it anyway. Now that I have two even portions, I am doing what is called a pre-shape. I am just shaping my dough into a neat circle and just making sure that all the gluten strands are nice and organized. Um, if I'm only making one loaf, I don't tend to do this. I usually go straight into shaping. But since I did a lot of cutting and dividing of the dough, I like to go ahead and pre-shape the dough. This helps so that the dough doesn't have any air pockets or any very large uneven air pockets, that is. So I'm pre-shaping, and then after I pre-shape, I allow it to sit on my counter for 15 minutes just so that the gluten can relax before I shape it. And I'm using cast iron loaf pans. I enjoy making mine in a loaf pan. And I'm going to go ahead and now shape these two loaves. I'm going to shape these very similarly to how I would shape just a traditional sandwich loaf, but I'm just trying not to push the gases out of the dough because I do prefer a nice open crumb, so I don't want to press all of the gas out of the dough. So I'm handling this very gently. I just take one end, fold it towards the middle, take the other end and fold it in towards the middle, and then I roll that up like a nice tight log. I slide it gently against the counter just to build a little bit more tension in the dough, and then I go ahead and I pinch the side seams of the dough. And when I finish shaping this, I put it seam side down directly into my loaf pan. I'm not using a banneton. I'm just putting it directly into my loaf pans. And then I repeat the same thing again with my second loaf. I pull one end into the center, pull the other end into the center, and then roll it up like a log. And then I gently push it across the counter just a little to create some surface tension. And I pinch the ends and then I put it into my loaf pan. So here are my two shaped loaves, and I'm covering those with my little shower caps that I always use to cover my loaves. After I shape the loaves, I put them into my refrigerator to continue fermentation in the refrigerator. You could let them stay overnight, but I like to bake mine same day. So I usually leave mine in the refrigerator for about 3 hours or so. I know that my dough is ready to bake when I poke it and it either doesn't spring back or it springs back very slowly. So I am going ahead and scoring my loaves. I'm getting ready to put them in a preheated oven. My oven is preheated at 450 degrees. So I'm going ahead and using my bread lame and scoring the tops of the loaves. I'm baking these loaves at 450 degrees with a pan of water on the bottom rack for 20 minutes. Then after 20 minutes, I remove the pan of water and continue baking at 425 for 20 to 30 minutes. I like to take my loaves out of the oven once they have an internal temperature between 205 and 210 degrees Fahrenheit. Here are my finished loaves. I'm taking them out of the cast iron pan so that they can cool. I love the nice crispy crust that I get using these cast iron pans. Here are the finished loaves. I got a nice oven spring with these loaves. And it looks like it's time to replace my bread lame, my blade that I use for scoring, because as you can see, it was very tough to get a nice, good cut into the dough. So here, this is the next day. I finished baking those loaves before I went to bed, and here's the next morning. I am cutting the loaves and just looking at the crumb. So it looks very nice. This is a nice open crumb, just how I like it. I'm now switching to my electric knife because my regular bread knife was having a tough time cutting through the bread. This bread is my absolute favorite for just my daily lean bread.
It has a crispy exterior and a soft, chewy interior. You can see how soft it is there. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching.